This is the Literacy Mindset Podcast, where education leaders discuss identifying and removing phonological barriers with Mindplay's CEO, Jeff Pendleton.
All right, well, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Literacy Mindset. Really excited for my guest today, Dr. Kellen Adams, Superintendent of Schools in Leavenworth Unified School District in the great state of Kansas. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Not too bad. Not soaking up sun down in the bayou like so many are at the AASA conference. But thanks for taking time and joining the show today.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
Why don't we start with just a brief overview? Tell us a little bit about your journey to your seat in Leavenworth and what it is that you love about your role.
Absolutely. 17-year educator. I'm a lifelong Kansan, so born and raised in Northwest Kansas.
Okay.
And you might say I've got a family of educators. So stepmom, who's the dean of Kansas State University College of Education.
Okay.
My grandfather was now deceased, was a superintendent back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Wife is, she's been an educator since her first job. So she's now instructional coach. She was a reading interventionist.
Okay.
Now an instructional coach, previously a classroom teacher for 10 years. This is my 12th year in administration, 6th year in the superintendency, and 2nd year here in Leavenworth.
Excellent. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about Leavenworth then.
Absolutely. What I would just say is very unique in Kansas. There's 286 school districts in Kansas, and I have struggled to find a true peer of ours.
Okay.
And this might make some sense, but we've got 3 penitentiaries that are either in the district or directly adjacent to. We've also got the intellectual capital of the United States Army. It's called the Command and General Staff College on the Fort Leavenworth, which is directly north of us by half a mile.
Okay.
And then we've also soon to be is an ICE detention camp. We're the first city in Kansas and also the first high school in Kansas. And so you've got a lot of generational wealth, generational buildings, etc., as well as people that are very transient to the district. So we've got folks that have been around. They're now 3rd, 4th, 5th generation of their family. And we've also got folks that will be with us only 6 or 9 or maybe 12 months, and then they'll transition out, if that makes sense.
Got it. Is that likely because of military influence more than anything, or what kind of causes the transiency?
Sure. I would say it's twofold. First of which is the military influence. So what is unique about Fort Leavenworth is it is a training post, more so for your officers than it is necessarily for those that are directly in the combat arena, if you will. So the folks that are over there are traditionally on a 12 or 24-month post during this heavy intensive training, and then they actually go to their next assignment. And so that creates some of the transition. And then the second is just simply our demographics.
Got it.
Unfortunately, a lot of poverty, and so that leads to a lot of level of transiency as well.
Got it. And roughly 3,500 students in the district. Does that sound about right?
Yep, we've got about 1,300 in our high school, 3,500 in the district.
All right, excellent. And you have a unique thing, unique to you and others around the metro area, but in Kansas City, you got both Missouri and Kansas. You're part of a metro area that sort of bridges 2 distinct states that might have different philosophies. Does that impact things much, or do you stay pretty Kansas influenced? Do people come from Missouri and start asking about the way that things are done there? How does that affect it?
Sure. I would say that generally speaking, we're much more linked to Kansas.
Okay.
Even though my office is literally 4 blocks from the Missouri River.
Jeez.
So we are truly on the border. But one of the things that's interesting now that you mentioned that, so we're in the Kansas City metro area. We're up in the northwest corner of that greater metro area.
Okay.
And one would say we are suburban in nature because we are primarily housing. But the reality is we're very much more like an urban core of the county, what I call urban light, because of our demographics and otherwise. Not a lot of industry or commercial properties for that matter. 0 ag land. But for purposes of housing, there's a lot of multifamily housing in addition to the single family housing. But to the point on Missouri, what we often get And a recent example of this is Missouri has a different way in which they fund schools, and it's funded on ADA, average daily attendance.
Right.
We are funded by the number of kids that are sitting in seats on the 20th of September. What happens is you see how snow days are handled differently. So here's a storm that's theoretically affecting the metro area the same.
Sure.
Right? Like the ice, the snow, whatever, the conditions are the same regardless of if you're in Leavenworth or if you're in Platte County, which is directly across the river from us. But yet that decision might look vastly different for us than it does for Platte County. Because I'm going to always default to, I'm going to try to find a way to have school. But I think the Missouri schools have a much different approach because there is indeed a financial penalty if they were to have school on those days and have a very low level of attendance. And so you see from time to time, I would call it the cherry picking. What do we like from Missouri that maybe should or could be used over here? And that would be one example I can think of recently.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for that piece. Okay, talk us through a little bit about just where you're at from a reading or literacy standpoint in the district. How are things going, and maybe some things to point out. I know there's a big science of reading movement that's gone through, especially the Midwest, it seems, in general. But just kind of talk us through, give us some context.
Sure. So second year here, so a lot of this honestly predates my time.
Okay.
I will tell you that our district has been very intentional about saying that literacy must be number one. I believe that our test scores would attest to this. They are certainly nowhere where we want to be.
Okay.
And I think us at least recognizing, I think step one is always you must recognize you have a problem.
Right.
Our district did a great job on recognizing, hey, this is the problem. And I've had this expressed to me anecdotally time and again. People are almost frustrated that the focus on literacy is so high because I think they're saying, hey, other things matter too. And that's certainly not the district's message that, hey, math doesn't matter, et cetera.
Sure.
But I think what's being asked is, hey, how do we create focus on something else as well? And our response to date has largely been, hey, until we can get people to read, nothing else really matters. Like, it is such a foundational skill
Right.
That a child must be able to read in order to take them to higher levels in any other content area, et cetera. So I applaud people before me for creating that focus. In congruence with that is a statewide focus that largely started under legislative mandate. And I will tell you that it was really probably 3 to 4 years ago that really this percolated, and it's now making its way into the actionable steps that are, actually being executed now by districts and locally at the school site level. One of those was the expectation that anybody that qualified or was deemed to be directly in contact with students of reading. So think through, in general terms, K through 5 elementary teachers, those that are teaching in an ELA assignment. And I was just looking at the list. It also includes your reading interventionists. So like my wife was on the list. Right? We have an expectation now in the state of Kansas is as you come up for licensure, you will have what's known as the seal of literacy. And so the seal of literacy is this credential. And we are using, it sounds like, pretty consistent with other states, letters to achieve that seal of literacy. And so it's creating, if you will, the carrot. Some are calling it the stick, probably depends on your perspective, for purposes of any time anyone comes up for relicensure, having that seal of literacy. And this is essentially bolstering maybe gaps in their traditional teacher training or things that haven't yet occurred in several districts and making it consistent across the whole state.
That's a great point. What mandates can come out of the state and how they can be helpful for maybe filling gaps. Do you find teachers coming out of school today ready and prepared for this, or that there is a need for them to kind of get letters or other trainings that can kind of fill in this, or are universities doing a better job today kind of with the science of reading instruction?
I'd say we're seeing a shift. The problem is, and this is no knock on higher ed at all. Please hear me say that, but they don't probably move as fast. We're just as guilty sometimes in K-12 as some of these initiatives would necessitate, right? Okay. So I think about that freshman that's now getting ready to be a sophomore. He or she's got 2 years left, and then they're getting ready to student teach. Right. It's likely that they will have already missed any programming changes because they're already in the system. Does that make sense? Yep. And so we have those, what I would say, pre-service teachers that will likely need something bolstered from what did not occur during the post-secondary training. If post-secondary can respond accordingly, theoretically, this would be built in addition to, say, concepts related to classroom management,
Right.
good instructional planning, all those things that are in a teacher preparation program. But by and large, this has not been in teacher preparation programs for the last several decades. And so this will be I would say, a fundamental paradigm shift for our teacher prep programs.
Got it. No, that's a unique perspective. Thanks. Okay, maybe elaborate and share with us when you can describe that the community at large is aware of the fact that literacy is your number one focus. Maybe offer some specifics. Talk to us about what is it that you do or that you say or that you plaster on the wall. How is it that people know that it's number one?
Sure. And I'm going to start really with probably our teaching staff, that this is the most near and dear to, right?
Okay.
But they have grown, I would say, somewhat frustrated that subjects like at the elementary level, for example, science and social studies, are taking a quote unquote backseat to reading, right? And
so you're allocating more time to reading. Is that what you're describing? Okay.
It is. Yep. More time, more resources, right? More focus, et cetera. For example, we have interventionists. So these are good men and women that are not in a traditional teaching assignment,
right,
but are working to supplant, if you will, the traditional classroom teacher. Well, we have, guess what? Reading interventionists and math interventionists, right? And if you look at the numbers across the board, more resources are being put into the reading intervention and into the literacy folks than they are into math, right? And so that would be one example where we, as you say, money talks, right?
Sure.
Where we are putting our resources largely supports where we are focused. I would say second is from our parent group. They have largely articulated, a desire for, a well-rounded education. So they expect, and I think rightfully so, that their child gets exposed to things like PE, physical education.
Right.
They want their children to have a robust experience with science or STEM, whatever phraseology you want to use there, right? And their frustration has grown that, hey, my child may not be getting as much STEM or STEAM exposure at the expense of more time spent on reading. And we would fully agree that is what is occurring, but it is occurring by default or by design. And so I think that you've got people that aren't necessarily in disagreement with it. Rather, it's just a frustration that it's coming at the expense of something else, if that makes sense.
Got it. And is it, I guess at some level, time is a zero-sum game, right? You only have so much time that you can put towards that. How do you stride that across populations, right? For those that maybe, is that where some of the challenge comes? Some are reading, some aren't reading. And so maybe you kind of have to go as a collective cohort. Is that how you maybe describe it?
Yep. So I'd say you hit on another frustration. And to paint it with a broad brush, what we frequently are told is you're teaching to the middle,
sure,
or you're teaching to the low end, right? And so you've got some students that are clearly getting it. They're clearly ready to achieve. They have achieved. They're ready for the next step, whatever, and are expressing frustration at either the rigor and or the pace and or sometimes both as not being challenging for them, right? And so the reality is we're very much into a cohort model across the board. I mean, I would love to tell you that we've individualized teaching and learning for every single student, but I would not be accurate with that, right? Yeah. We put 20 kids into a third grade class with one teacher, and we say these 20 kids are going to stay with Mrs. Smith throughout 24-25 school year, right?
Right.
So largely speaking, all 20 get the same experience.
Yeah.
And, 5 of those students might be our really struggling readers, and we might have 5 that are super high achieving. The argument is that those 5 high achievers are having to sacrifice as a result of where the other 5 or 15 are at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that is. And it's certainly something that happens a lot as we think about the inner workings of a classroom and how do we make sure that those can get exposure to what it is that they are engaged with. I do want to stay on the other end of the spectrum, though, because there are legitimate challenges and hurdles in the way for that. So what are some of the things that you do when students are struggling. They are in a cohort, they are kind of in Mrs. Jones's class together, but they still have phonological gaps, they still have fluency gaps, they have other challenges. Are there, how do you think about intervention? You use a specific framework? How do you think about that?
Yep. So I would say we have two primary supports. The first of which is support for staff.
Okay.
And so my wife would be one of those.
Right.
She is what we call an instructional facilitator.
Okay.
And so she is there to support the needs of staff, whether that be in their lesson planning, their pedagogy, their curriculum, etc. She is largely a staff resource.
Okay.
Conversely, then we have interventionists that are, I would say, 99% student resource.
Okay.
And so collectively, they are working with that. I'm just going to go back to that example of Mrs. Smith, that third grade teacher. My wife is working more with Mrs. Smith on the delivery and maybe individualization of her instruction. Maybe she helps her into some group instruction that breaks them into 3 different groups for the week.
Right.
Based upon their current level within this assessment, or based upon this units learning, right? Conversely, then you have the interventionists that come along, Mrs. Smith, and they help in what's known as tier 2 or tier 3. And so that MTSS framework that I'm sure you're quite familiar with is very much alive and well in Leavenworth.
Okay.
One of the things that we have really, really tried working on is you cannot intervene your way out of bad instruction.
Mm.
And so while it may sound great that we have all these interventionists and we can get kids into smaller groups, et cetera, which we do, at the end of the day, the core instruction, what happens in tier 1, happens for everybody.
Right.
So as core instruction improves, theoretically, we should all go up. Said differently, a rising tide lifts all ships, right?
Right.
And so if our only approach is just on the intervention side and never on bolstering the tier 1 side, I don't think we'll ever fully intervene our way out of this. And so that's why we've kind of tried to attack that from both fronts, if that makes sense.
No, that's great. Okay. I want to maybe spend a little bit more time on the challenge of individualization or personalization. You mentioned to me earlier about the technology in the district, that you have a lot of technology. You've been almost one-to-one for a decade. Are there things that you're doing with technology that help with individualization or personalization? Is it a distraction? There's a lot of debate in the world, in the U.S. in particular right now, around the value of education. Clearly, as an ed tech provider, I think about it a lot. What are we doing to help schools? So maybe just walk us through what does technology look like, and does it, or are you using it to try and help out on the individualization side?
I would say we do have a robust infrastructure.
Okay.
We've got great coverage as far as devices, as well as the ability to use those devices, not just from a support standpoint, but also from what applications are available for teachers to augment instruction, right? What we have probably not done a great job of is finding a way to individualize for every student. And so right now, that is an area for improvement from my perspective.
Okay.
I'm not saying that the support isn't there or the effort isn't there, because, again, I'm only in year 2. So I'm not sure I have the full wherewithal to say here's where the core of the issue is. But generally speaking, I would say we're not using it to fully individualize based upon my current perception.
Okay. And we talked about some challenges. This is a common thing that we talk about relative to the goal of reading success or any student achievement, is technology in the form of personal devices and its distractibility within the school. Lots of different policies that are on the table legislatively, policies that are being put forward. What have you done at Leavenworth? Kind of talk us through how you handle personal devices across the grades.
Sure. This one I do feel better about. I would say that largely speaking, our focus is on ensuring current policy and practices followed this year.
Okay.
So no, I would say new rollout of, some brand new initiative or whatever else, right? Rather, it was, let's just focus on emphasizing and becoming nauseatingly clear on the current expectations. And so I'll pick on the secondary because that's usually where this is an issue.
Sure.
Not saying the elementary kids don't have this, but generally speaking, it's more of an issue with our middle school and high school. we made it clear that we're going to follow the current policy. We're going to enforce it and become very consistent across the system. As you can imagine, I've got kids that have 6, 7, 8 teachers throughout the day.
Right.
Well, if half their teachers aren't enforcing it and the other half are, that sets up everybody for failure, whether it be the teachers that are deemed to be cool and lax or the teachers that are deemed to be, too strict. And then you've got a principal somewhere in the middle caught trying to referee the inconsistency as a staff, right? As well as a young person that's left to wonder, what is the right way in the world? Is the right way for me to follow the rules of the system, or is the right way for me to break all the rules of the system, right? Because he or she's got adults sending both those messages right now. And so we have decided that first, let's enforce and or ensure our current practices are followed. Then, if we have an issue, we'll decide whether or not we need to adopt something new. But first, play by the rules before you decide if we need to rewrite the rule book is kind of our approach.
Got it. Okay. And is there pressure coming legislatively around that, or the communities to have policies in place, or what's the temperature on it?
I would say from us locally, I've not experienced it, but at a statewide level, yes.
Okay.
You had a couple bills that made their way through the legislature last year, did not make their way all across the finish line. But clearly there is enough interest, I would say, within the state of Kansas that led to some of our legislators saying, hey, I'm willing to bring this to the table, made its way out of committee, but ultimately didn't, make its way to the governor's desk. So it's clear it's being emphasized in several of our Kansas communities, especially as I've seen and watched others that have gone through, all the various steps involved with the board adoption of new policy and, all the implications of whether that be yonder bags or otherwise. It's definitely I would say a Kansas specific issue, or we are, if you will, joining the rest of the nation that are also experiencing issues.
Talking about it. Okay. Well, if we stay on a technological thread here around literate conversations, what are you guys doing with AI, and how are you thinking about AI literacy, both at a student and teacher level?
Yep. I'm so glad you asked. We are proud to say we were the first school in Kansas to adopt Magic School AI across the district.
Okay.
We did that, I would say, with some intentional thought behind not making it mandatory, but rather creating an additional resource when people were ready. So did not mandate that every teacher had to use it or it became a part of their regular day or week, but spent I'm going to say, intellectual capital as well as obviously some financial capital to make it available for everybody. And then our director of PR has really embraced it. He's kind of led the charge, so to speak, on getting people, certified is the proper phraseology to use, as well as helping support them as they begin to integrate. We've clearly got the bell curve of you got your early adopters all the way through those laggards, right? I'm seeing the bell curve playing out on a daily basis in this topic. But I would say what we've seen so far, we're very encouraged. I think that our approach has been spot on.
Okay.
Too often in education, we come out with thou shalt start using or thou shalt stop using, right?
Right.
And we know how that goes, and we just decided not to do that with this. And I think as a result of that approach, that's why we haven't had any groundswell of, I can't believe we're doing this, you know, or why the heck aren't we embracing it more? I mean, it's very much been you go at your own pace, so to speak, with staff.
Grassroots effort sounds like a good way to go. Okay. Yep. Well, we could spend a lot of time talking about things. We covered a range of topics, and I've really appreciated learning more about how you guys think about and operate on these topics. My final question today will probably be something that is always my final question, and that is the crystal ball side of things. We've been more technologically oriented in the last questions, and so we might say there, but you could deviate for sure. But as you pull out your crystal ball and you think about the next 5 to 10 years, what are things today that are happening that you think they're going to stay happening, that they need to stay happening, you want them to still happen? That's one way to predict the future, right? That's things that won't change, right? And then maybe something that you feel like needs to change, or that you're hopeful, or that you see a pathway to it changing. Maybe give us those two different perspectives.
Sure. I'll maybe start with the second one first, if that's okay. I'll tell you the same thing I'm telling our staff and specifically our district cabinet. At some point soon, we're going to have to start showing results. or else the system is going to self-correct. In the business world, if you don't eventually have a profit, we all know what happens, right? And largely speaking, the business world operates under different dynamics. They can, quote unquote, fire customers or become selective about their market, et cetera. We in Kansas, we don't get to fire kids, right? We have an obligation to take the kids that are living in the district. But I also believe we have an obligation to show results and show people that, hey, the investment in education, which by the way in Kansas gets 50% of the statewide pie, you're getting your bang for your buck. And so my fear is if we don't start showing results, that the system will self-correct. You'll either have a mass migration to homeschool, private school, vouchers, whatever. That's a whole other conversation. Okay. Yep. And so if we don't figure it out, eventually it will correct itself, if that makes sense.
Got it.
Conversely, I want, and I'm hoping to do that here in Leavenworth, is to pour nitrogen on career and technical education. I believe it is definitely where our focus, I'm not going to say it needs a shift, but needs to be re-emphasized.
Okay.
As I look at workforce trends and what we are hearing as far as the next generation, whether that be the baby boomers that are going to fully enter into retirement, or where our country is going, knowledge of the trades and being able to support the labor base and for those trades are going to ultimately impact whether or not local economies and local towns either thrive or begin to reach capitulation. And so I'm hopeful that school districts will embrace their role and say, hey, how can we help to create a more robust career and technology CTE program, so that we can help our local economy, our local revitalization, and ultimately create some renaissance where it needs to occur.
That's excellent. Well, thank you. That's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that with us. I've had a really exciting, excellent time today. You showed us a lot about what's going on. Thank you for joining the show. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Learn how we help students by identifying and removing phonological barriers at mindplay.com.